G'day guys and welcome to the English Aussie FPL channel. Today we're going to go through the Elite 1000 managers and what their transfer plans are looking like, what their teams and ownership is looking like, and also what their strategy has been so far and what potentially it could be going forwards, and see how that can help you decide on your teams and your players. So we've got some stats from the Elite 1000 and their ownership percentage for goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and forwards. And we're going to talk through each of these in a little bit of detail. And we're going to see how this relates to your teams and what we think their plans are going forwards and what we think we can do, and maybe some ways that we can better them. At the moment, you can see the top four Elite 1000 goalkeepers are Flecken with 54.7% ownership, Valdemarson at 39.2%, Fabianski at 34.9%, and Raya at 24.8%, with Henderson in fifth at 12.7%. Now we're looking at this, and obviously Flecken here is 54.7% ownership. I think that's also likely to do with, as we'll see later, 56% of managers chose in the Elite 1000 chose to wildcard in game week 6. And with Brentford's great run of fixtures at that point, I would expect that a lot of them chose to go for Flecken, with possibly some others going for Raya. The reasoning for Valdemarson at 39.2 and Fabianski at 34.9. Now, Valdemarson is probably because if Flecken gets injured, Valdemarson is the second keeper for Brentford, and therefore they're likely to at least have one keeper in there. Fabianski at the beginning of the season was probably people's likelihood as most likely keeper to come in if the first choice keeper didn't do well, and Areola for West Ham. I think those are now two keepers to avoid when you're bringing into your team because they're quite highly owned. At least Fabianski at 17.1% overall ownership, which is like regular FPL managers, whereas Valdemarson is only at 3.4% regular FPL managers. The high percentage for Fabianski means that there's potential that if people come out of him on wild cards or if their first choice goalkeeper gets injured, that is a potential for him to lose ownership and for his price to drop. If you're looking at set and forgetting for the whole season, you don't need to worry about that. But if there is a potential that in your next wild card you might want to transfer out of him and go for another 4.0 million keeper, perhaps you want to rotate 4.5 million goalkeepers and change your strategy in the future. I think if you are going for someone like Fabianski now on a first wild card, for example, I'd try and avoid that just for the potential for the price drop. Valdemarson, on the other hand, I think is a good second goalkeeper to have, especially if you have Flecken as your first goalkeeper. Despite the Elite 1000 having 39.2% ownership of him, only 3.4% of average managers are holding him, therefore much less likely to price drop and for people to see large swings out of Valdemarson. If Flecken gets injured, he's a great, therefore, backup choice. So you've got always one goalkeeper playing without having to use a goalkeeper transfer. Raya at 25% was probably a gamble that people went for, having Arsenal as the strongest defence, looking for a set and forget goalkeeper. I think at 5.6 million, it's just a bad decision. Never have I thought 5.6 million goalkeepers are one to go for. Normally, there's always someone at 4.5 million or 5 million that's going to outscore these goalkeepers just based on saves. There's normally, the big teams maybe keep 10, 11 clean sheets in the season. On the other side of that, you're going to get a lot of save points from these other lower teams where maybe they concede a few more goals, but they're likely to get some other points throughout the season. Henderson at 12.7%. Now, I think that's probably a hangover from the beginning of the season, and that's likely to be that 12.7% of managers that have Henderson probably haven't wildcarded yet, probably still holding on to him from the beginning of the season. So that's something even though that's a high ownership potential. I wouldn't look at Henderson going forwards. I don't think Crystal Palace have been particularly good defensively, and I don't think they're likely to be great going forwards in the future. Um, then outside of that, I think the interesting things to see are Martinez at 12.7% of our ownership, Turner at 14.2, Sanchez at 12.1. I would say some interesting picks outside of what we've got in the Elite 1000 would be Edison 8.4. We've got where the Elite 1000 only got 5.2. Man City run of fixtures are really good. If you're looking for a 5.5 million goalkeeper, which again I recommend against, I would say Edison at the moment over Raya is probably a stronger option, especially um, if you're able to play an earlier wild card in the second half of the season. That sort of, the City defence maybe hasn't been amazing, and maybe we're just targeting this current fixture run, which for goalies is not as easy to do. So I think consider if you're going to go Edison, you're probably looking to play an earlier wild card, maybe in 18, or perhaps you've got a bunch of free transfers saved up and you can play a mini wild card in 12, 13, and later down the line. At the moment, I think my best option, I think the Elite 1000 got it right. I think Flecken for the time being is a good 4.5 million goalie. Brentford, good fixture run. We can look to move out of that later in the season when the fixture run switches up in the second half of the season. Moving on to the defenders, you can see at the moment 87.4% of the Elite 1000 have Gabriel, 65% Alexander Arnold, 47% Lewis, and 47% Greaves at Ipswich. 34.9% with Mikalenko. So Gabriel, I would say, is just because Arsenal are the strongest defence in the league. They want to cover off that Arsenal defence. Arsenal have not performed particularly well as a defence so far this season, in my opinion. The stats might say slightly differently from expected goals, expected assists, and their overall performance. But from watching the games and looking at how they've shaped up, you can see they're actually conceding quite a few shots on goal. And quite a few chances that last season they were a lot stronger and didn't concede. I think the good thing you can say for Arsenal is their possession on the ball is really good and they're keeping the ball well, which is keeping teams from having less opportunities against them without just playing on the counter attack and trying to play in transition. Similarly for Liverpool, I think you see the same sort of thing. And obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold with his attacking returns is why he's so heavily owned by the Elite 1000 membership. What's interesting there is you can see last game week there's a minus 5% change. You can see people starting to come out of Trent and starting to go into Gvardiol, who has a positive 5.1% trend. I think people are seeing now, and you can see that trend in the Elite 1000, is that Lewis also has been picked up by 2.3% extra. They've slowly been starting to move into this Man City defence. And I think a double up of Man City defenders is really looking like a good option going forwards over the next few game weeks with their good fixtures. You can see there Wolves, Southampton, and Bournemouth in their next three. Lewis and Gvardiol also very attacking options. They're getting into the opposition box. Gvardiol takes lots of shots. Lewis has missed some good opportunities in the box. I know he got an assist last week, but he sort of passed it to Doku. Doku ran down the pitch and slammed it in the top corner. But take it for Lewis owners. So I think you can see that that's the sort of trend that you're seeing in that Elite 1000. And I think they've got it right on this opinion, in my opinion. And I think that sort of double up is the way to look going forwards. Outside of that, if you're looking at some of the cheaper defenders, they have very highly owned Greaves from Ipswich and Mikalenko from Everton. Now, Mikalenko is mostly based off that fixture run coming up. You can see on the screen Ipswich, Fulham, and Southampton. Very good fixture run going forwards. And Greaves for Ipswich is likely just due to his attacking output. Greaves has been getting forwards quite a lot for Ipswich. I do think this one is where they've probably got it wrong. I think if I were to go for one of the cheaper defenders. I don't think Greaves would be where I would go. Um, I'd probably more likely go for a Mikolenko at 4.3 with Everton, who in my opinion is probably a slightly better defence than Ipswich. Um, on the other side of that, obviously Greaves is a little bit cheaper. I think he's 4.1 million. If you're going to go with someone at 4.1 million, it's probably a Wout Fires or a Greaves. Greaves with a slightly additional attacking output is good. Both Ipswich and Leicester both have good fixtures going forwards. I think if you've got either of them in your team as bench fodder, they're both good options to have. So yeah, I think that's what we'll say for defenders. In the midfield, a crazy couple of stats. Mbuemo at 98.4% of the Elite 1000 owners and Saka at 96%. It'll be really interesting to see what that looks like next week. Once we go through game week 8 and whether people are starting to come out of Saka and into Palmer, you can already see 5.8% change in Palmer. People starting to go into him from the Elite 1000. You can see, interestingly, Luis Diaz, Salah, and Palmer all have really high ownership from average managers at 36, 40, and 48, whereas the Elite 1000 only have 26, 20, and 16. Palmer potentially is an area where yes, I'm sure a lot of average managers are jumping on bandwagon with Palmer scoring the points, or perhaps they have held him before and are probably gaining a leg up on these Elite 1000. But this is potentially a way where you're looking to gain rank on the Elite 1000 managers. Like maybe Palmer is completely fixtures proof and he's going to go and score a bunch of goals. He's got the highest non-penalty expected goals and assists of all midfielders. And maybe that Liverpool fixture is not going to be bad for him. With Alisson out, maybe he's going to score goals. Newcastle might perform badly. And then suddenly everyone's looking around going, why don't we have Palmer in already? His price is going to rise. So that's a really interesting one. I'd be interesting to see if people start coming out of Saka either this week or after this week and start moving into Palmer or maybe even a Mo Salah. And Buemo, obviously, I think is a set and forget in your team. And if you're in that 75% of all managers that don't have him, I'd be definitely looking to get him in with his good run of fixtures and also playing up front for Brentford. Rodgers at 85%. Now I think Rodgers in there just purely because at that price point, of 5.1 million, he is just priced so well for an attacking midfielder for Aston Villa. And I think really the only people around that price point that really can compete with him is Semenyo at 5.6 million, and also Adama Traore at 5.1 million. So I think what you're seeing here is Rodgers is basically as a price point pick where a lot of these Elite 1000s are trying to make money to pick some of those bigger players like a Palmer, a Saka, a Haaland, Salah, and try and build all of these premiums in the team, as many as you can fit in. And Rodgers is a fantastic person to have, either as your first bench option at 5 million or starting every week as he's starting for Villa and scoring points. I mean, so far he's already got 21 points. And then Semenyo probably the same. He's already got 31 points, 46% ownership. Really interesting to see how highly owned these guys are among the engaged Elite 1000 members, as opposed to the sort of the average FPL member where they're at 21 and 11%. I would say going forwards, one of the things that I've noticed, actually, Rodgers probably doesn't have the greatest fixture run. And if you can, if you want to sort of go for a slight differential in that position, I would say Adama Traore for Fulham would be a really interesting one. He doesn't even make this top 20, 30 list of the Elite 1000 ownership potential percentage. So he'd be a really interesting pick to go for. You also see Johnson on here at 6.3%. I think nobody had him in until last week. Now they're all piling into Johnson at Spurs. I expect to see that increasing more, especially if he gets a goal going forwards. Let's move on to the strikers. And obviously, Erling Haaland, the surprise of absolutely nobody, is top with 80.6% ownership. I think everybody, engaged and non-engaged managers, know Erling Haaland needs to be in your team. He's 73.4% owned overall, which is a crazy number. Solanke and Calvert-Lewin, the next two highly owned strikers. Now, I think you're beginning to see over here that these Elite 1000 membership managers are all really heavily targeting fixtures. For example, you can see here Solanke, Calvert-Lewin with great fixtures. Those are the most highly owned players. Haaland with great fixtures, and obviously a robot. And then you see people more like João Pedro and Havertz and Wood that slightly lower in the ownership, a bit more differential picks. João Pedro is probably in there from earlier managers again that haven't wildcarded yet, that had him in at the beginning of the season, just because he's quite a cheap option at 5.5 mil. Havertz at 25.2% again was probably through Arsenal's fixture runs, the last two games, and then this game coming up against Bournemouth. I think he'll probably start dropping out of the team after that. And then Chris Wood, who's been probably a really underrated pick this year. I think Chris Wood has probably impressed quite a few people. And he's actually been really efficient with his scoring. He has, as a points per cost player, has probably is in, I think, the top 15 points scored per million that he's worth in the game. And he's better than Salah, Saka, and Haaland in that regard. Outside of that, I think Stewart is just a 4.5 million fodder that people were holding on the bench. Some of the interesting ones is Nicholas Jackson, 18.2% for regular managers, and Watkins at 28.7%, which is including myself in that, Watkins. And I think people maybe starting to look away from that with their difficult fixture runs coming up, or maybe Watkins just not so much difficult, but not fantastic fixture run coming up. I'm holding on to Watkins just mostly because I had the opinion at the beginning of the season that he was the focal point of that Villa attack. I still have that opinion. I think that Villa had a poor game week against Man United last week, and you felt like they had the hangover from that mammoth effort they put in the Champions League. If that continues going forwards, or if John Duran starts picking up more minutes in the Premier League, and Watkins starts picking up less rather than them both playing together, then it might convince me to come out of Watkins, and I'd probably look towards maybe a Solanke, maybe a Wood, potentially even a Havertz if I come out of Saka and go into Palmer. So there's a few options to think about there. But yeah, I think those are the key stats for both defense, offense, and goalkeepers. Yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any comments on who you think are better picks, and if you can pick better than the Elite 1000 yourself, comment below. Let me know. More than happy to give my comments on some of your teams or some of your thoughts as well. Thanks, guys.